Old Stefan, the gardener at Northwood Elementary School, was pruning the rose bushes that Autumn insisted on punishing when a different sound cut through the afternoon air. It wasn't the usual echo of children's laughter, nor the sharp whistle of the physical education teacher. It was a low, rhythmic, almost musical noise that seemed to emerge from the bowels of the building. A constant hum, a sad, single-note melody. The entire school was in an uproar. Amelia, the 8-year-old second grader, had disappeared from the playground. The police were already there, the parents had been called, and panic was an extra character on the scene. Everyone was looking for a child who, according to the official version, had run away. But Stefan, who knew the sounds of that school like the lines of his own hands, knew the difference. That wasn't the sound of someone running away. It was the sound of someone seeking refuge. Which city or state are you following this story from? Regardless of the place, try to imagine the heavy silence that settled in everyone's hearts before the truth finally decided to reveal itself. Elena felt as if her lungs were forgetting how to function. The air came in and out in short, painful gasps, an agony that had lasted 4 hours. The cell phone in her hand trembled, a useless rectangle of glass and metal. Each new call was just another hallway that ended in a wall. The school principal, a woman named Mrs. Dawson, spoke with a professional, almost robotic calm that only served to amplify the terror growing inside Elena. "We are doing everything in our power, Mrs. Novak. The police have our best officers on it." Best officers. The phrase was a punch in the stomach. Their best officers hadn't been able to see an 8-year-old girl wearing a bright yellow dress simply disappear from a fenced-in playground. Sitting in the police station waiting room, the smell of stale coffee and cheap disinfectant made her feel sick. Mark, her husband, paced back and forth like a caged animal. His face was a mixture of rage and fear, held back by a thread. "How did they let this happen, Elena? Tell me, how?" The question hung in the air, expecting no answer. It was a scream. Elena didn't have the answer. The only thing she had was the vivid image of Amelia that morning. The 2 blonde braids. The dinosaur backpack that seemed a little too big for her small shoulders. She remembered adjusting the strap and kissing her daughter's forehead, smelling the sweet scent of strawberry shampoo. "Have a good day, sweetheart," she whispered. Amelia, as usual, didn't respond with words, but her eyes, as deep blue as the ocean, met hers for a single, precious second. A second that now seemed to belong to another life. Elena's mind was a storm of guilt. Should she have put her in a special school? Should she have pushed harder for a full-time therapist? Everyone had an opinion. The experts, the other parents, the neighbors, but none of them knew Amelia's private universe. None of them knew about her sacred ritual of organizing pencils by color. None of them understood that the noise of the vacuum cleaner was physical torture for her, or that the texture of a simple pea could trigger a meltdown. To the world, Amelia was a label, a diagnosis, autism spectrum disorder. To Elena, she was the sun. A sun that sometimes set behind clouds so thick that it was impossible to know if it was still there. A young police officer, with dark circles under her, eyes that betrayed long shifts, approached cautiously. "Ms. Novak, we've received a report. A witness said they saw a girl matching Amelia's description near the old train station." Elena's heart skipped a beat. Train station? The metallic noises, the flashing lights, the crowds. That would be hell on earth for her daughter. It didn't make any sense. But desperation is like a shipwreck survivor clinging to any piece of debris. Mark was already on his feet, ready to run toward that glimmer of hope. But Elena felt a chill run down her spine. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. The image of her little girl cowering in a corner, overwhelmed by a million stimuli, was torture that paralyzed her. She closed her eyes, trying to connect with Amelia, to feel what she was feeling. And what she heard in her soul was not the whistle of a train. It was silence. A deep, vibrant silence. The same silence she found when Amelia hugged her. The train station clue turned out to be a dead end. A lost girl, yes, but it wasn't Amelia. It was another child who was soon handed over to the arms of a relieved mother. For Elena, every hope that died was like a stab in the heart. The world around her turned into a circus of guesses and theories. Neighbors showed up at her door with casseroles and unsolicited advice. I read on a blog that children with autism have an inexplicable attraction to water. Have you looked in the river? Said a woman, her face contorted into a mask of false sympathy. The river. The suggestion made Elena's blood run cold. Following protocol, the police plastered Amelia's smiling face all over the city. The photo, taken on her 7th birthday, was one of the rare moments when she tolerated the flash of a camera. Seeing that smile plastered on lampposts and bakery windows was a surreal experience. That was her daughter, reduced to a case, to a police report number. The external pressure was an invisible monster that suffocated her. On social media, the news went viral, and with it, the cruelty of anonymous judges. But where were the parents? Why does a child like that go to a regular school? This smells like negligence. The words were like stones thrown by people who knew nothing about the exhausting love, the love that bends but does not break that she felt. Ms. Dawson, the principal, called every few hours. Her words were a corporate script, carefully rehearsed to avoid any admission of guilt. We are reevaluating our safety procedures, Ms. Novak. Our top priority is and always will be the well-being of our students. Elena wanted to scream that their priority wasn't a rule book, but the smell of strawberries in her daughter's hair. The school subtly began planting the theory of a planned escape. They said Amelia had been very interested in the maps in the geography room. Maybe she had decided to go on her own expedition. Mark, desperate for logic, for an explanation that didn't involve the worst, almost believed it. She's so smart, Elena. Maybe she just wanted to see the world. But Elena knew that was a comforting lie. Amelia didn't want to see the world. She desperately wanted the world to leave her alone. Running away wouldn't be an adventure. It would be a terrified retreat. The cruelest part was the emotional roller coaster. For a moment, the idea of Amelia as a brave little explorer hurt less than the image of her cowering and scared. But a mother's intuition is a compass that never fails. None of those stories fit her daughter. It was like trying to put together a puzzle with the wrong pieces. The pain came not only from her absence, but from the world's complete and utter misunderstanding of who Amelia was. They were all looking for a girl who didn't exist, a neurotypical girl who got lost. But Amelia wasn't lost in the way they imagined. She was hidden. Elena felt it in every fiber of her being. The conflict between Elena and Mark exploded on the second night. The apartment, which had always been the family's refuge, became too small for two such different pains. Mark, an engineer who lived in a world of logic and solutions, was obsessed with the school's failure. He spent hours on the phone with a lawyer discussing lawsuits, negligence, and moral damages. They're going to pay for this, Elena. I swear on my life they're going to pay me. His pain turned to anger, an energy he needed to direct outward, toward a clear target. For Elena, anger was a feeling she couldn't afford to feel. All her energy was focused inward, in a desperate attempt to find Amelia's frequency. This isn't about money or revenge, Mark. It's about finding our daughter. She finally exploded, her voice hoarse from crying for hours. You're here, planning a war, while she's out there somewhere, alone and scared. And what do you want me to do? Sit on the floor and start meditating? He retorted, frustration oozing from every pore. At least I'm doing something practical. The gulf between them widened with every word. It wasn't for lack of love. It was the way grief and fear manifested themselves in each of them. Mark needed an enemy to fight. Elena needed empathy to keep from falling apart. At school, the conflict was more veiled but equally painful. Mrs. Dawson, squeezed between the pressure of the school board and the panic of the other parents, began to weave a narrative to save the institution's reputation. At a meeting, she used the phrase, history of unpredictable behavior, to refer to Amelia. The expression, spoken in a clinical, distant tone, made Elena's blood boil. Unpredictable behavior? You mean the sensory crises you refused to help us manage? You mean the times she hid under the table because the fluorescent lights in the art room were unbearable for her and the teacher thought it was acting out? The principal backed away, but the damage was done. The school was no longer a partner. It was a company managing a public relations crisis. They didn't see Amelia. They saw a problem, a risk, a potential lawsuit. The battle wasn't between good and evil. There were no real villains. There were only people who were afraid, reacting according to their most basic instincts. Mark, with his protective father instinct, which translated into action and confrontation. Mrs. Dawson, with her instinct for self-preservation, trying to protect her career and her school, and Elena, with her mother's intuition, the only compass that still pointed true north. She felt terribly alone, surrounded by people who either loved her or should have helped her, but no one could see the simple truth that pulsed in her heart. Amelia didn't run away from danger. She ran away to find safety. The only question was, in such a noisy and chaotic world, where could she have found a safe place? Far from the chaos of the police station and the heated discussions in the Novak apartment, Stefan, the gardener, continued his routine. He had worked at that school for over 30 years. He had seen principals come and go, generations of children run through those same hallways. He was a quiet figure, almost part of the landscape, but his watchful eyes saw everything. He saw the cliques that formed at recess, the small acts of cruelty that took place away from the teacher's eyes, and he saw the children who, like Amelia, floated on the margins, in a universe of their own. Stefan had a granddaughter, Anya, who also saw the world differently. She wasn't autistic, but she had a sensitivity to sound that made everyday life feel like an assault. For Anya, the world was a cacophony of unbearable noises. It was from her that Stefan learned about the beauty of silence, about the peace that can be found in quiet spaces, forgotten by the world. He saw his granddaughter build little nests of comfort for herself in the most unlikely places. As the police combed the city, Stefan thought about Amelia. He watched her every day at recess. She never ran with the other children. She usually sat near the old oak tree, drawing patterns in the dirt with a stick, and sometimes he saw her staring at the small, dirty windows in the school basement, the ones that were almost at ground level. No one ever paid attention to those windows, but Amelia did. Stefan had noticed. On the afternoon of the second day, when most of the staff and police had left, silence finally fell over the school, and it was in that silence that Stefan heard it again, that low, constant hum, coming from the east wing, where the basement door was located. It was a sound he recognized, the sound of the old emergency generator, which was only turned on for maintenance tests, but there was no maintenance scheduled. And beneath the hum of the generator, he heard something else, a murmur, a vocal sound, repetitive, almost like a mantra, ignoring protocol, ignoring the yellow police tape that still surrounded parts of the property. Stefan grabbed his heavy bunch of keys. They were old iron, keys that opened doors no one bothered to use anymore. The basement door creaked, protesting against the daylight. The air that rose from there was cold and damp, smelling of dust and stagnant time. He descended the cement steps, one at a time, his heart beating at a steady pace. The big twist in this story didn't happen with a siren or a scream. It happened in silence, guided by the empathy of a man who understood that sometimes the safest place in the world is not the one we are offered, but the one we build for ourselves, far from everything and everyone. Down there in the darkness, broken only by the dim light of his cell phone, the humming and murmuring grew louder. He was close. The basement was a graveyard of school furniture, piled up desks, moldy cardboard boxes, projectors, and equipment from another era. The hum of the generator created a constant vibration on the floor, a heavy white noise that isolated that place from the rest of the universe. And there, in a corner, protected by a barricade of overturned desks, Stefan saw her. Amelia was sitting on the floor, cross-legged, rocking her body back and forth in a rhythm all her own. The murmuring came from her. It was a sound that calmed her, an anchor in the middle of the sensory storm that had brought her there. She had built a small fort. Using old book boxes and an old fabric world map, she created her own refuge. Inside the nest, she was surrounded by the treasures she had found in that basement. A handful of marbles that glowed in the dim light, a wooden abacus whose colored beads were perfectly aligned, and an old slide projector, which she methodically cleaned with the sleeve of her yellow dress, now covered in dust. She didn't seem scared. On the contrary, she seemed to be at peace. Stefan didn't call out to her. He knew that a sudden sound could destroy that sanctuary, turning it into a prison. Instead, he sat down on the floor, at a safe distance, and simply waited. He did nothing. He just breathed, trying to become part of the silent environment she had created for herself. The minutes dragged on. Amelia continued her rocking and murmuring, perhaps aware of his presence, perhaps not. Then Stefan took a small, perfectly symmetrical pine cone out of his pocket. Without saying a word, he rolled it slowly across the cement toward her. The pine cone stopped a few inches from her foot. Amelia stopped rocking. The murmuring ceased. The silence in the basement became absolute, broken only by the hum of the generator. Very slowly, she lowered her eyes and saw the pine cone. Her little hand reached out and her fingers explored the rough, geometric texture of this unexpected gift. She didn't look at Stefan, but after a long moment she picked up one of her marbles, a blue one with white designs, and rolled it back toward him. The little glass ball stopped near his work boot. That was it. There was no thank you. There was no hug. There were no tears. There was an exchange. Oh, conversation in a language they both understood. A small but huge victory. The silent acknowledgement that he wasn't a threat. He had entered her world, not to tear her away, but to sit with her in the darkness. Stefan took out his cell phone and, with trembling fingers, sent a single message to Mrs. Dawson's number, which he had seen on the posters. I found her. In the basement. Bring her mother. Alone. And quietly. Elena descended the basement stairs as if entering a temple. Mrs. Dawson, pale and wide-eyed, stood at the top, finally understanding the depth of her misunderstanding. When she saw Amelia sitting in her nest, Elena's first impulse was to run, grab her, and get her out of that dirty place. But the image of Stefan, the old gardener, sitting peacefully a few feet away, stopped her. There was a calmness in that scene that she didn't dare break. She looked at the objects her daughter had gathered, the abacus, the marbles, the map as a roof, and then, like a bolt of lightning, she understood. This was not a prison. It was a castle. Amelia hadn't run away from school. She had retreated to the only place that offered her what she needed most, a cocoon. The hum of the generator, which would have been annoying to anyone else, was a constant, predictable sound to Amelia, a sonic blanket that protected her from the screams in the courtyard, the fluorescent lights, the shrill bell. There, in that basement, she was in control. She could line up her marbles, feel the smooth wood of the abacus, swing at her own pace. Tears began to stream down Elena's face, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of overwhelming clarity. For 2 days, the world had searched for a victim. But Amelia wasn't a victim. She was a survivor, an architect of her own safety. All the advice, the theories, the pressure from others, it all fell apart in the face of that simple truth. Her daughter was not fragile or incapable. She was incredibly strong and resourceful. She had solved her problem the only way she knew how. Elena realized how much of her own fear she had projected onto her daughter. She wanted Amelia to fit into a world that wasn't made for her, and she suffered every time that didn't happen. But maybe the mission wasn't to force her to fit in. Maybe it was to help build more basements. Not actual basements, but spaces of safety, understanding, and acceptance. She approached slowly, mimicking Stefan's stillness. She sat down on the floor, on the other side of the little fort. She didn't say, "I love you," or "I was so worried." She simply picked up a small stone from the ground and placed it near her daughter, like an offering. Amelia looked at the stone, then at her mother. For the first time in 2 days, her blue eyes met Elena's, and for a moment, a whole universe of communication flowed between them. In that dusty basement, Elena did not rescue her daughter. It was Amelia, in her silence, who rescued her mother from a prison of fear. Real transformation was not finding Amelia, but finally, for the first time, truly seeing her. The trip home was made in a thick, meaningful silence. In the back seat, Amelia held Stefan's pine cone in one hand and the blue marble in the other. There were no interrogations, no crowd of journalists. Stefan and Elena made sure of that. The story that was told to the world was simple. The girl had been found safe and sound, hidden inside the school. The deeper, truer details were kept for those who mattered. Mrs. Dawson, deeply shaken, initiated a complete review of the school's protocols, no longer out of fear of a lawsuit, but out of a newfound sense of responsibility. She met with Elena and Mark, this time not as an administrator, but as an educator who had failed and was willing to learn. Mark, seeing his daughter's calmness and hearing the story of the castle in the basement, felt his anger drain away, replaced by a mixture of admiration and shame. He had been so focused on fighting, the world that he hadn't stopped to try to understand his daughter's world. That night he didn't talk about lawyers. He sat on the floor of Amelia's room and watched her put the pine cone and marble back on her shelf, next to the dinosaurs. It was a new beginning for him, an invitation to a quieter, more attentive fatherhood. The pain didn't disappear as if by magic. Elena's anxiety didn't heal overnight. The world didn't suddenly become an easier place for Amelia. The crises would still come. Communication would still be a daily challenge. The basement wasn't a cure, it was a lesson. It taught them that Amelia's safety wouldn't come from forcing her to be someone she wasn't, but from learning to listen to what she needed, even when she didn't use words. They learned that they needed to be the builders of their own refugees, the architects of their safe basements in the middle of life. The victories remained small, but now they knew how to recognize them. One day, it was Amelia, taking Elena's hand in a noisy supermarket. The next day, she showed Mark a drawing she had made of the solar system, with an extra little planet where she had drawn a nest. The journey was still long, but now they had a map that did not lead to a normal destination, but charted a course through Amelia's unique and extraordinary universe. They were no longer walking in the dark, because they had learned from their own daughter that sometimes it is in the darkness that the truest light is found. Hope no longer lay in the illusion of a problem-free life, but in the certainty that they had the tools and, above all, the love to face them together. Not every escape is to run away. Sometimes it is a desperate search for a place to simply be. Amelia's story is not about getting lost, but about how, in unexpected ways, we find each other in the language of silence and care. Not all love speaks, but all true love listens. If this story touched you in any way, if you've ever felt misunderstood or struggled to understand someone you love, like this video, leave a comment and subscribe to the channel. Your sharing could be the sign that someone, somewhere, needs to know that they're not alone. Someone may need to hear this today.